listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time once again for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. So I hope everyone's having a good week. Life during wartime. So we're about 10 days or so, almost 2 weeks, now that I look at it actually, into the Russian war against Ukraine. And I'll be talking about that, of course, as the show goes on. I've got some thoughts on that. We'll be talking about Ukrainian Nazis and why that's so important, because I read a great article on that I want to talk about in a second. But we got two great guests today, and I'm feeling fine and kind of woo-woo-y. Let me explain. Our first guest today is Tyler Nixon. And Rod, you and I did not discuss having Tyler Nixon on today, did we?
No, not at all.
Okay, so I'm going to wait to tell the story. When you hear the story, you're going to see why I say I'm feeling kind of woo-woo. The fact that you got Tyler on today, I was at dinner last night, and Tyler Nixon's name came up, Rod. With people in Sioux Falls.
Yeah, I wasn't there with you. I wasn't included in this dinner.
Right, and I didn't tell you about it. It was all because yesterday I was wearing a Grateful Dead shirt. I was wearing a kind of trippy tie-dye Grateful Dead shirt. And I was at dinner with someone last night, and they said, wait, is that a Dead shirt? And I said, yeah. They said, you know Tyler Nixon, right? Now imagine my shock, sort of, at someone in Sioux Falls. It's a political person, so it's not completely weird that they know Tyler, but still, that's a little weird, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, if they would have followed up and said, do you know a guy named Rod?
Right. And then the fact that you booked Tyler today, I'm going to tell the story later, and I'm going to say who the person is. And Tyler will go, oh, yeah, I know that dude. But I'm just saying, it's sort of interesting. So Tyler Nixon is joining us as our first guest today. We always love having Tyler on. That'll be a lot of fun. And I'll tell the story of how his name came up last night, which is kind of woo-woo. Then Addie Ads is joining us. Addie, of course, is a young journalist who's out there covering the Jeffrey Epstein story every day outside the Ghislaine Maxwell trial in New York. And he's got a book out about it now. We'll talk to him about that. We'll see how things are going. And we're taking your calls, of course, 202-521-1320. It's The Backstory. Okay, what I'm going to do is, rather than Tarif is on the line, and rather than keep Tarif waiting at all, today he's on the express lane. Tarif, what is on your mind?
Thank you for taking me, taking my call, Lee. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange. I have like three comments. My first comment, come to find out.
We're taking you right at the beginning, Tarif. If you had 30 comments, all I could do is kind of sit here and listen, because you always make good points. So go ahead.
Okay. If the Fed raises its rates this year, if they have to raise the rates, the markets will become shaken, and we might have a crash similar to 1929, maybe. If it don't raise its rates, then hyperinflation will set in, will become out of control. Oil and gold will continue to rise, and it just be a lot of things would be super expensive to buy, as you can see already with $4 gas, like in Louisiana and California, up to $7 now. The Saudi Arabia, and my second comment, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates turned down Biden's phone call, but yet they spoke to Putin about what was going, about the oil price.
Tarif, let me stop you there for 1 second. I'll have you keep going. But I told you, you do a great job of bringing points that I was going to talk about. You're always very have great points to bring up. This is a big one. What he's talking about is the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia took a call from Putin about the Ukraine-Russia war. So they're talking to him. But then when Biden called, they were busy. It's what the kids call ghosted, I guess. Right? Is that what happened? So they didn't take his call. Now, I want you to think about this, everybody, and you too, Tarif. When have you ever frickin' heard that happen, ever, that they refuse to take an American president's call, but they take, and it's not like Cuba, it's Saudi Arabia and UAE. Can you think of this ever happening before, Tarif? You will speak for everybody, but go ahead. Okay, ever. Has anything like that ever happened?
No, it never, from my knowledge, from my understanding, it never happened to a U.S. president before. That never happened before.
They were basically Saudi Arabia and UAE were saying to their friend, "Tell them I'm not here. Tell them I'm washing my hair." Whatever they were saying, they didn't take Biden's phone call is the point. And think about this. That's really bad. And it's not bad for Russia. It's bad for the United States of America. It is absolutely shocking that that's happened, not with one country, but two countries. And Saudi Arabia, remember when we had such good relationships with Saudi Arabia that Donald Trump got to put his hand on their glowing ball? I'm just saying, it's not get your mind out of the gutter. But you've seen the picture of Donald Trump with the orb. I guess that's what the kids are calling it today. Like, I'm so mad at him while kicking the orbs, whatever they say. I don't know that. But my point is, Saudi Arabia has been our biggest ally, much to my chagrin occasionally, in the Middle East. And now they're not even taking Biden's phone call. So go ahead, Tarif. Keep going. Okay. But I really want to emphasize this, along with the stupid, dirty jokes. This is huge. Get your mind out of the gutter about this is huge. Don't say that's what he said. Don't say that. It's offensive. Okay, go ahead, Tarif.
My second to last one is this. Once Russia have collected documents from the biolabs, they will be also bringing them to the ICC, to the UN, with China's backing them and other nations. And they will go through the files to find out what was taking place with those 30 biolabs in Ukraine. And they will be exposing the U.S. to what they've done in that region with these the plague and the anthrax and all that was in the paperwork that Russia have. You know, they will like
Command Central. Do we have the Rubio clip? The Newland. It's the Rubio Newland.
Yeah, we should have.
Rod, which one is it?
Yeah, give me 1 second. I'll give you the title, but we do have the clip. Give me 1 second.
Okay. So, yeah, go ahead, Drew. Keep going.
Okay. And my last comment is this. I was listening to Tom Lagongo and some other analysts. They was basically saying the same thing, but in a way kind of disagreeing. The so-called globalists is not like one dictator. It's many people, and they're also fighting each other. So you got the Davos crowd, which is your Klaus Schwab. You got the American crowd, which is your Wall Street boys, right? The Wall Street boys, the Fed do not like Davos at all because the Davos basically is trying to wreck the U.S. economy to save Europe. And what the U.S. is trying to do is wreck the European economy to save the United States. So when November come around, you're going to see a big change that's going to happen when you're going to see us, the conservatives take power in the Congress and Senate because the Wall Street boys are going to be backing them with a whole bunch of money. They're tired of it.
Well, no, I agree. And for a variety of reasons, you're not going to see the Democrats. If it was not over before, once everybody's paying $8 a gallon for gas, forget about it completely. But I got to push back on one thing because the Washington Post is watching us very carefully, Tarif. I cannot have you making Russian disinformation points here on the backstory. talking about these biolabs in Ukraine. How dare you, sir? How dare you, I say, disseminate these Russian talking points, these Russian disinformation. Let's play that clip from yesterday, shall we? Who believes there's biolabs?
So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
I'm sure you're aware that the Russian propaganda groups are already putting out there all kinds of information about how they've uncovered a plot by the Ukrainians to release biological weapons in the country and with NATO's coordination. If there's a biological or chemical weapon incident or attack inside of Ukraine, is there any doubt in your mind that 100% it would be the Russians that would be behind it?
There is no doubt in my mind, Senator, and it is classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning to do themselves.
No, actually, it's classic you technique, you lying snake. Victoria Nuland, you liar. You just admitted that the United States has biolabs in Ukraine, because she did. She admits that they have it. And, by the way, they're not innocent. They're not the playful biolabs. They're not the biolabs that are there to help humanity. Is there such a thing? Does anyone have such a thing? Sharif, have you ever heard of a biolab? Is Sharif gone?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Hey, Sharif, have you ever heard of happy biolabs like they've got, like at McDonald's, where they've got like a, you know, it's like a bin full of biolab material, all in little orbs, I guess, right? There's no happy biolabs. When the DOD's funding these things, this is about bioweapons, right, Sharif?
Yes, it's about bioweapons. And I'd like to add, Russia have witnesses and former workers that worked in those biolabs, too, that's going to testify. So God knows what type of information these witnesses have, too.
Yes, and let me point out that clip of Victoria Nuland in front of Marco Rubio, and then Marco Rubio going, okay, we have bioweapons labs, but if there's bioweapons, it's Russia, right? And her going like a little lapdog. Yeah, Marco. Yeah, Marco, sure. It's definitely the Russians. By the way, and I said it on Twitter. Thanks for the call, Sharif. Great call. I'm going to leave a little note here for the State Department. Dear State Department, Victoria Nuland is a woman who was caught on the phone saying F the EU and picking the leadership back in 2014 of Ukraine. And now Victoria Nuland, in front of Marco Rubio and the world, because it was on C-SPAN, is admitting their biolabs. So I'm not saying anything except, dear State Department, haven't you figured out that Victoria Nuland should not open her pie hole? For God's sakes, this is a woman who should not be talking. Because as soon as she opens her mouth, state secrets pour out of it. I'm just saying. And she did it again. And that clip of her talking about the biolabs is going to be played on YouTube videos and documentaries forever. What they were calling Russian disinformation, she basically said, no, it's absolutely true. So let's, and that's such a big deal. I'll slow myself down for a second because I want everyone to think about this. We had a U.S. official, a top U.S. official, one of the people who knows Ukraine as well as anybody at the State Department, Victoria Nuland, admit in front of Congress and on TV, no, she was not admitting this. She was not like drunk at a Chili's out on I-95 or something like that one night, and she leans over to the wrong guy and says, you know, we got biolabs in Ukraine, and he happens to be a Russian disinformation agent at a Chili's on I-95. It happens because they do have delicious, cheap margaritas, and, you know, the Russians love that. But it's not like she was caught on audio like she was before. She saw the cameras. And by the way, Victoria, I made the joke about myself, so I don't feel bad saying it. They say the camera adds 10 pounds. And apparently there were 15 cameras on Victoria Nuland. Figure that joke out. It's offensive. Because the biggest problem on Victoria Nuland is not that she's ugly on the outside. It's that she's ugly on the inside. Victoria Nuland admitted to these biolabs. So think about this. We overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014. We overthrew a democratically elected government. Now, what did we do after that? So we overthrew Yanukovych. Did we bring them peace? Well, apparently not, since there's a war going on. And it was a war that the U.S., Caitlin Johnstone had a very good thread today. The U.S. and NATO, which is the U.S., are the ones responsible for this war. They were the ones who wouldn't listen at all to what Russia was saying. If you go back and look at what Russia was saying, they said, these are our demands, and if they're not listened to, I forget the phrase they used, but they said military engineering. It was obvious that they were serious. Listen to our demands here. And so the U.S. did not bring peace. It did not bring prosperity. Ukraine ended up being the poorest nation in Europe. People were literally freezing to death from a lack of heating oil, something, by the way, you should get used to in Europe. I'm just saying. Do you know what I would buy if I were you in Europe? Is some very thick blankets. I'm just saying. And also get used to drinking your coffee cold.
Hey, but Lee.
Yeah, go ahead, Rod.
Yeah, but if you go back to Victoria Nuland's statement, these labs are just for research. You know, it's just research. There's nothing nefarious going on.
Well, that's why I said the idea that they're just for research is what you got a school science paper due, Victoria. We don't put labs right in the country right next to Russia, where you've heard the stories how they were collecting Russian DNA, right? Right, Rod?
Oh, yeah. I saw that. And then, again, I mean, how do you research the plague? I mean, there's already 100 years to research it. Why do you have to actively bring it back to research it?
Now, I made the joke yesterday, and we'll get to you, Ingrid, and then Brave in 1 second. But I made the joke yesterday that Hunter Biden was caught in one of these labs trying to build a 50-foot crack whore. Because if you think about it, it solves a lot of problems. If you could engineer that, attack of the 50-foot crack whore would be great. But 202-521-1320, Ingrid in D.C., what is on your mind?
Well, you have totally convinced me on the Victoria Nuland testimony, because if they were doing research on how to cure the common cold, there would not be any danger of that research if it fell into Russian hands, as she said. So,
right.
This is you're right.
Yeah, no, Ingrid, let me just fill people in. Ingrid and I spoke on the phone earlier, and at that time, you had not heard the Victoria Nuland clip, right, Ingrid?
That's right.
Yeah, and I said to you at the time, you've got to hear it, because you've got to hear it. Anybody, and you see why I said that to you, because once you hear it, you go, this is going to be, like I say, in YouTube videos and documentaries for decades to come. We witnessed the birth of a journalistic meme, right? You agree on that?
Absolutely.
Well, and one point you've been making, Ingrid, and I said this to you when we spoke earlier, the peace and justice movement people who've been going after Russia and defending Ukraine, and unfortunately, a lot of people who are peace activists have been doing that. Look what you're defending. Not you, Ingrid, because you're not one of those people, but do you agree with me that the peace activists who've been defending Ukraine really need to stop and check themselves before they wreck themselves? What do you say, Ingrid?
Yes, but here's the thing. A lot of these people, it's like they didn't pay any attention to Ukraine until like this week. And it's very difficult. I had a very difficult conversation with an old friend of mine today, and I had sent him Max Blumenthal's article about the Nazis, the Azov in the Donbass, and he was just completely flummoxed. And it's just too big a subject. I don't know where you start with these people to say, well, this has been going on for years, and don't bitch and moan about the humanitarian effects of a war. The war didn't start 2 weeks ago. It's very...
No, if someone's a Quaker, if someone's a complete pacifist, at least I understand that, and I get that as a position. If you're just against war at all, any violence, including if there is a threat, and you're just a diehard pacifist, okay, that's fine. Other than that, the reason war is bad is because innocent people get killed. Therefore, I don't think it's valid to criticize unless you reject the concept of war as such and say, I don't like any innocent people getting killed. Okay, that's fine. There's problems with that position, but at least it's logically consistent. But to not see that this is ginned up by the U.S. and that the real threat here is the U.S. because we invaded Iraq on the lie that they were developing bioweapons, weapons of mass destruction. But we were doing that. We had biolabs blanketing Ukraine. It is offensive, but Ingrid, great call. Thanks for the call. Great talking to you earlier. 202-521-1320. Let's go to Brave in Atlanta. Hey, Brave, how you doing?
How's it going, Lee? The Victoria Nuland piece was amazing. I was like blown away when I was watching this, and the idea that Rubio, because to me this is the major part of this, right? Rubio just pushed right on past it, and I mean, she like you said, she just acknowledged that we do have bio warfare labs. I mean, they're not saying warfare, but fine, bio labs over there. And who knows, God knows what else, because we've been pushing so much corruption and so much dirty stuff under the rug over in Ukraine. Ukraine has been our rug for all of our dirt, right? And to have Rubio just not even acknowledge it in any way that means anything, to me says it all about this effort and every bit of it going forward. And I keep on asking the question, how does this thing end? What comes out after this? And I don't necessarily mean, and I'm saying this because I would like if you could maybe bring it up to Tyler. I don't necessarily mean how does the war end, or where does this Ukrainian war go? I mean, whether that wraps up or not, where is the U.S. going after this? Because I subscribe to what Dr. Richard Wolff has been saying for some time now, that the U.S. empire is on the decline. He's not the only one saying it, obviously, but it's on the decline. And the level of desperation that we are seeing with the way that they are shutting down media, shutting down voices, going after people's private property and all of these things, that just being outright racist and xenophobic. And these are the liberals who are always talking against xenophobia, right? They're just outright doing these things. I can't help but wonder, where does the country go after that? Where does the U.S. standing go after that? Like, it's like a pretty girl slapping you in the face at a party. What do you do after that in front of everybody? That's my question, I guess. And I'll leave that to you.
Well, are you asked? Did you hear something about me at a party? Because that didn't happen, Brave. I'm just saying. I deny that completely. By the way, Brave, I quoted you the other day. I want to make sure. Did you say Putin or Russia ain't playing?
I said Russia's not playing. Russia.
That's okay. That's what I thought. Yes, I quoted you properly. I was listening to the End by Any Means, and you were calling in, and you just said Russia ain't playing, and I'm like, that is the best summary of the situation that I've heard. That is incisive political analysis. Russia ain't playing is exactly what's happening, and Russia's not playing. And so you ask where this is going on this biolabs thing. I'll tell you who ain't playing on this. China is also not playing. This is going to keep going, whether the American public does what it should do or not. Everybody listening should be contacting their elected representatives on social media or on the phone or whatever. Everyone should be saying, Marco Rubio, you need to go. Marco Rubio, goodbye. Someone take their 50-foot crack whore and stomp his little butt into the ground, because that's not a Lindsey Graham-style assassination plot, because there are no 50-foot crack whores. I'm just saying. But Marco Rubio, you need to leave. The fact that you're okay with bioweapons labs in Ukraine funded by the United States. And by the way, you bring up, they're not saying these are biowarfare labs, but would anyone be giving Russia benefit of the doubt, anybody, if Russia had overthrown a democratically elected government, let's say down in Old Mexico, down south of the border, if they'd overthrown the democratically elected government, put in a Russian puppet government, and then it turned out we had biolabs in TJ, in Tijuana, Rosarito, where the Titanic was, places like that. And then Russia was like, no, no, no. These bioweapon labs that are right on your border, no, we're just doing research in case we want to make anthrax vodka tonics or something. I don't even know what they're thinking. But nobody would believe them. Nobody, including me. I would be going, come on, get better at lying. And so, therefore, Marco Rubio needs to go. And everybody in Florida, anybody who supported Marco Rubio, needs to call his office and tell him to resign. Marco, go back to whatever little tiny, Cuban-American mouse hole you came from. I don't know. It's probably very small. Because he is short. And I say this as somebody who's not gigantic. I'm 5'8" on a good day. On my tiptoes, I'm 5'8". I'm probably 5'7", because you shrink as you get older. And I was right on the cusp there before. So I'll go with 5'7", sure, why not? And I'm still taller than Marco Rubio. There we go, 202-521-1320. David in New York, what's on your mind?
Yes. Russia will eventually have to leave Ukraine. Of course, it's clear. But when that happens, the sanctions will still be in place. They're not going to go away. Okay, those sanctions are essentially permanent, or until unless there's some kind of regime change in Russia that satisfies the U.S. So that's the first comment. The second comment is that. But
let me point out that Russia's got their own sanctions. Russia's got their own. Hey, we're not going to send you stuff. And that's not going away either. So keep going, David.
Are willing to let the Americans and the European middle classes pay that price to destroy Russia. But my main comment is this, okay? When Russia leaves, unless they leave with a signed agreement that Ukraine will be neutral, there's nothing to stop the Americans and NATO from coming right in and building bases. So there's a dilemma that Russia has, which it really can't solve. And the likelihood of a signed agreement where Ukraine will remain neutral, I think the Americans won't agree to that. The Americans want to destroy Russia, even at the cost of American citizens.
David, it's a very good setup for something I want to talk about. We don't have enough time to do it now, but in the next hour, because we had so many great phone calls. And I was so spazzy, admittedly. I was a little spazzy. I may have had a little too much latte. But this Victoria Nuland thing is so gigantic, it's hard to realize what the implications of it are. But I'll talk about exactly what you were just talking about, David. The U.S. was trying to destroy, in 2014, Ukraine's relationship with Russia. And that's why they got the Nazis in there. When you get people who racially hate Russia, who hates them so much that they think they're subhuman, that's a good way to destroy the relationship forever. Because they not only didn't want a neutral relationship, they wanted to destroy Russia's relationship. But I'll talk about that at the top of the hour. It's no co-host today. My co-host is this jug of caffeine that I'm drinking here. So expect a little spazziness. Coming up right after this, though, and I'll tell the story of the cosmic significance of Tyler Nixon being our first guest today on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back. You're listening to the best damn radio show in the world, despite the Washington Post's best efforts on 105.5 FM, AM 1390. By the way, did you notice, Rod, in that story, they didn't mention 105.5 FM, just the AM station? Did you notice that?
Yeah, I did notice that. I did notice that part.
By the way, I understand. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I looked at the guy. The guy's name's Paul Verhey, I believe. I looked at his Twitter and all that. The guy who wrote that Washington Post article, and, very liberal guy, and point out facts to him. It's like water off a duck's back. It doesn't stick.
I sent him a note. I sent him a letter because I got an email link for him. So I sent that dude a letter saying, hey, I work for Sputnik, and I'm happy and I love my job. And, but you're not going to print that. And I understand that in the morning on Fault Lines, Jamal Thomas was upset he did not get credit for being the UFO guy because they mentioned UFOs were discussed. They didn't mention that our show frequently takes on important topics like crack whores. They didn't mention that. They should have put in there was discussion of Hunter Biden's son and crack whores. They should have put that in. That would have made the WAPO article. But I understand Jamal was not happy that the UFOs, he did not get credit for that. Did you hear about that, Rod?
No, I didn't hear that Jamal got upset about it. But I would get upset, too, because that is kind of his thing. And for them to put that in the article to make it seem like we're just some wackos on the radio and not credit his name, that's kind of messed up.
He was also... And some people were upset that there was a photo of me and Garland in there. And it's not, again, it's an old photo. I think the reason they use that is, first off, I look fabulous because I am dressed rather nattily. But second, it's got the Sputnik logo in gigantic, the logo on the wall behind us there. So it's very clear what you're looking at. Two people in front of a Sputnik logo. And then I'm gesticulating with my hand. And by the way, Garland looks fabulous too. Garland's dressed up in a suit. We both got dressed up for the Washington Post to smear us, which is the way we are. But Garland looks fabulous too. But there's no Jamal in there. Well, just you weren't working here at the time. But we've had Jamal on to talk about UFOs before. And he should have gotten credit, WAPO. What are you doing? Trying to keep him down. Now, I will tell the story in a second here. Joining us now is the great political activist, thinker, and occasionally voice raiser, Tyler Nixon. Hey, Tyler, how you doing?
Good to be here on the Russian state media, as always.
Thanks. So I'm going to tell the story now. So I have a new shirt. I'm going to hold it up so people can see it on the video. But I got a new Dead shirt. And it's a tie-dyed shirt with a very trippy Dead pattern. I like shirts that don't say, like if the shirt says the Grateful Dead in giant letters, I don't like it. I prefer the ones that are subtle and graphic. You know what I'm getting at?
Wow, that's elaborate. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I have a huge T-shirt collection, and many of them are just obscure song references.
Right. So I had
like Mountain Dew. The Mountain Dew logo is Morning Dew.
Nice, very nice. So I was wearing that shirt last night, and I went out to dinner. And I was wearing that shirt at dinner underneath one of my Cuban shirts, and which makes it that much classier. And I was wearing my shirt out, and I was having dinner with somebody, and they suddenly looked over because it's a very intricate shirt. And after about 10 minutes of dinner, they said, "Is that a Dead shirt?" I said, "Yeah, you bet." And they said, "Do you know Tyler Nixon?" I swear to God, Tyler, that was the next line out of their mouths. You must know Tyler. Because I was wearing a Dead shirt, and I was having dinner with somebody. And I'm going to tell you who I was having dinner with. Ready? A man named Emmett.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, he's South Dakota, but no, a great guy, good man.
That's where I am. I'm in South Dakota.
Oh,
I'm in Sioux Falls.
I think you were North Dakota. Oh, awesome.
No.
No, he's Emmett's Emmett was a key leader in the cannabis reform movement here in Denver and Colorado, and I worked closely with him to get social use passed in Denver in 2016. And I believe he's running for a council seat.
City council. He is.
Yep.
So I got some other stories about Emmett Reichstoffer. I met him in 2014 when I was first out here. And Emmett is single-handedly responsible for having the vision that got both medical and recreational marijuana passed by voters in South Dakota. And the reason I say he's visionary is very few people would have looked at what is a very conservative state. South Dakota is a very Republican, very culturally conservative state with not a lot of potheads. Let me put it like that. It's the most negative about marijuana of any state I've ever lived in. People just aren't into it here. And he had the vision to go, you know what? Liberty-loving, freedom-loving Americans will realize that marijuana is not harmful in the way, let's say, alcohol is, much less, methamphetamine or Adderall or whatever. And Emmett had the vision to see that South Dakota could pass it, and it passed by overwhelming margins here. And Emmett's the guy who's behind that, and he is running for city council. And I went out with him last night, but it was weird. 10 minutes into it, as soon as he saw the Dead shirt, Tyler, he brought you up. Isn't that fun? Isn't that funny?
That is, yeah, it's great. And let me tell you, he is a real mover. I mean, in terms of, you're right, visionary and an organizer, and is super dedicated to whatever he sets his mind to. And he also has his license plate is Liberty, South Dakota, Liberty.
Yeah, no, I always liked Emmett back again. I've known him since almost about 8 years now, when I was up here in 2014 originally. And let me tell you what Emmett is about to do. He's getting ready, and I'm running this idea by you, Tyler, so I hope you don't hate it and make everyone sad and shoot Emmett's idea down here. But ready? As a city council person, he's about to say that one of the things he's going to run on is an ordinance that if he's elected to city council, any group that's connected to Soros or Klaus Schwab who's getting involved in local politics needs to reveal that connection. They can't just hide behind a generic name like Citizens for Good Government when really it's a Soros-funded group. Does that make sense? So all he's calling
Absolutely.
for is transparency. What do you think of that idea?
I think it's great, and I think local jurisdictions have every right to demand that sort of transparency, because look across the country, the insinuation of Soros's minions and the adverse impact it's had on communities. I mean, my God, San Francisco, like it's just, yeah, it's awful. And of course, I could see them targeting a place like South Dakota.
Yes, and I just and because he's a very pro-liberty person, right? Mm-hmm. The idea is who would object to transparency? Right. Just say what the group is. And by the way, the ordinance that he's passing, he says it's still working on the language, but it might apply to the Koch brothers as well. In other words, it's just about transparency. Say who's behind things. So it's not even, although Soros is much more dangerous, I think, than the Koch brothers. But anyway, so Emmett, I'm sure says, I know he says hi, because we talked about you for a while, Tyler, too, and how cool you were. And
thanks.
But anyway, I didn't tell the story to Rod last night. I was going to. And then I come on the show today, and here you are, Tyler. So it's kind of cosmic, I would say.
Absolutely. I'll tell you, I worked at a law firm here, and it turned out to be a hive of leftist and Obama bot types, Jared Polis, connected and so forth. And Emmett was the only person in that whole bunch. He didn't work at the firm, but he worked, he's closely associated with it with one of their main clients. And he was the only one that I left there with, and maintained friendships with, and was also politically aligned with. And he was very deft at, frankly, navigating the treacherous waters of, leftist cannabis politics, where it's all about, creating the cartel, basically, the legal cartel, and still getting things done and still doing good things. So, I think he's got a bright future, and I really would like to see him get elected and go further than that, frankly, because he's a good man and he's got a great mind and he's dedicated.
I think, honestly, that this proposal of his for the Sioux Falls City Council is going to make national headlines. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see him on a show like Tucker Carlson, let's say. I can see where that.
Well, I'm glad you told me, because I'll drop a text to Tucker to suggest that.
Well, let me tell you, because Emmett, let me tell you what else he's going to do. He's going to make it available, the ordinance that he's doing, to anybody who's running for city council, on a city council, or wants to run for city council, as sort of model legislation. Does that make sense?
Sure,
like
to sign on to it or state their position.
Own. Yeah, that's what I had dinner with him last night to discuss, because I think I really think that, and a guy like Emmett, who he is a coalition builder, right? He's a guy who can navigate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's exactly who you want. So a lot of people talk about, like, if I'm elected, we'll have bold new ideas. But then, this. Let me give you an example of how afraid the Sioux Falls City Council is. They had a proposal to put scooters, those scooters that adults drive. I've used them in D.C. I think you have them in Denver, right?
Absolutely, all over the place. Lime, Uber.
Right. They got afraid of it. The city council here was like, oh, no, we don't want the traffic on the sidewalks.
Oh, jeez.
They were, right, exactly. So I'm just saying.
Are you kidding me?
No, they were really, it was like someone was suggesting we're going to ride nuclear weapons around the streets of Sioux Falls. It's a scooter, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
And so
this
a guy
is the
like
too much
Emmett,
time on their hands syndrome.
Right. And so I agree with you. I think I think Emmett's got a very bright future. I saw him speak the other day, and I've known Emmett since 2014, always liked him. And I know when marijuana got passed up here, it's not about liking marijuana. It's about liking freedom. You agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. He also has a very easygoing, affable, conciliatory way about him that no matter, he's certainly a patriot and has ideological underpinnings, but it doesn't come across as strident in any way, and he's able to convey the message in a way that's very inclusive. So I think he'll go far, and I hope he does.
Yeah, and this model legislation that he's working on to just asking for transparency with Schwab and Soros, I really think is going to be quite a big deal. And also, he's a great spokesman for it, if you think about it. Because wouldn't you Emmett, he and Tucker, just on a personal basis, he's the kind of guy Tucker would like to have on a show just because he's, like you say, he's not strident. He's a reasonable, nice guy, right?
And he knows how to come up with good ideas that cut to the chase. He's not going to footsie around with it, but it is a definite. It doesn't come across as an attack on anyone. It's a great idea, and it's frankly about transparency. And who would say no? I mean, who would not want this sort of openness and information available to the voters? And it could become model legislation for use elsewhere across the country.
And I'll tell you his concern. When I mentioned to him, I said, I think you could end up on Fox with Tucker. He's running in what's the central part of Sioux Falls, which has a fair amount of Democrats. And he was worried some of them would be mad if he went on Fox. And I said, look, if Rachel Maddow called you and wanted you to have on, would you go on? He said, absolutely. I knew his answer. I said, that's what you should say to people. Look, they called me. They asked me to go on. If Rachel Maddow called me and asked me to go on, I'd go on with her. But you know what? I think he's smart to be afraid of liberals who would attack him just for appearing. You see what I'm saying? That's a valid concern to have right now.
I've always been one to wade into the enemy's territory and to try to speak to them, enemy, whatever opponent. I mean, I used to spend more time on the liberal blogs in Delaware, arguing with them and putting my points out there and winning over people, point by point, where they realize ultimately, look, we may not agree on everything, but you're a principled person and you can be you're reasonable. We can work through these problems on an intellectual basis, not just a tribalist, partisan, ultra partisan, really team sport, blue versus red basis. And I think Emmett's perfect for that. And he'll go into into the deepest blue territories to use that red blue paradigm.
Now, full disclosure, years ago when I moved out to California, I worked for a Ralph Nader group called CalPERG, the California Public Interest Research Group, doing phoning, fundraising, and stuff like that. And one of the reasons I went to work for CalPERG is I assumed that the people who worked there would have better weed. And it turned out to be true, by the way. I was accurate. So that's full disclosure on my part. So when I reach across the aisle, sometimes it's say pick up a baggie. That's all I'm saying. So now, and not Emmett, though. Emmett's a, because here's the thing. Emmett is not Tommy Chong. You know that, too. He's not a guy... You know what I'm saying? When you meet the guy, you don't go, oh...
He's no hippy-dippy sort of stoner type at all. No, he's very buttoned down, very squared away.
Yes, and so anyway, now, Tyler, let me ask you, I'm going to do for you what I've done for everybody so far on this subject. I'm going to give you carte blanche, free reign. What are your thoughts on the Russian-Ukrainian war? Any thoughts at all that you have?
Well, I'm coming from the perspective of having lived with the just mental patient now that we have in the Oval Office, Joe Biden, for 40 years practically in Delaware, listening to his bloviations and his nonsense, and frankly, often, in my younger days, almost terrified at the prospect of him ever ascending to the top job. Because he was such a first of all, an empty suit. but always having to sort of march to the head of whatever parade was, the prevailing wind blew through town, and claim credit that he didn't deserve, and prop himself up, pump himself up, but always wanted to be the big man, the head honcho, the shot caller, the guy who's, the historic figure and all this. Now I think he's basically just half gone, and that's not even there, which is almost worse because he's been turned into essentially a puppet, an empty vessel into which the absolute worst elements of the DC fascist, establishment Democrat Party and neocon Republican swamp can pour. And now we see this come to life. I mean, when he ran for president previously, my thought was this man will get us all killed if he gets elected. He's just that reckless and self-serving, and frankly willing to pander to anything that he thinks is going to serve his interests. And look, I mean, yeah, this is. I understand there was in 2019 a Defense Department sort of supercomputer simulation run called something like the NATO Ukraine Russia war scenario, and it ended up with 1 billion people dead and a nuclear war basically. So this is just insanity. These people are, frankly, the Adam Schiffs, the Kinzingers, this sort of fascist globalist neocon element has to be purged from our government, and I hope that starts this November. And Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, my God, I mean, they make McCain seem palatable at this point. These people who just are so blithe and cavalier about sending people to their deaths and committing American forces and the risks involved and the costs and consequences to us with potential $10 a gallon gas in the midst, on the heels of this phony pandemic that they ginned up and ran on the country. And where's King Fauci right now? Where's Lord Fauci? Disappeared into oblivion, knowing he's probably one step out of prison and should be, frankly, if not for mass murder, but just for the mass manipulation that he perpetrated on the public, and the extended nature of this thing and all the destruction domestically, lost businesses, suicides, people just entire lives derailed, incomes, jobs, you name it. And then the reinforcement amongst so many people of this notion that it's okay to force people to take a experimental medical treatment, or lose their jobs or whatever the consequences, that they've tried to push. And then suddenly it all just disappears as soon as this new issue this new agenda pops up to basically draw us into a war with Russia. Xi Jinping couldn't be happier, I'm sure, with this, with his minions, Biden's, frankly, and the others who are all, let's face it, Schiff, all them, they're all in bed with the communist Chinese. And it seems to me, it's funny. They sure loved Russia when it was the Soviet Union, when it was a communist dictatorship, and they couldn't get enough of it. Bernie Sanders, I mean, as I understand it, took his honeymoon there. And now suddenly that it's a nationalist nation that simply wants to look out for its own people and its own regional interests, suddenly they're the boogeyman, the monster of the world. And they've made it impossible for Putin, frankly, not to act to protect, his national interests with this neighbor, deposing, like you said, a democratically elected but Russia-aligned leader, and installing this, this puppet. I mean, this clown who's become a propaganda clown in so many ways, and was very much the linchpin of one of the impeachment farces they ran on Trump. And I think they know that they had to get Trump out of there. I mean, this is part of this agenda, and behind it is not just the neocon, military intelligence, industrial war establishment in Washington D.C., but also this larger globalist agenda, as you alluded. Klaus Schwab, that we this sort of the gods or the deities of our planet who think that they're the place to basically manipulate and control everything that goes on in the world to their liking, to their agenda. And look, it's horrible. It's horrifying. I mean, you can't help but feel for the people of Ukraine and, frankly, for Russian soldiers and the people who have to be sent in to deal with this. I mean, I don't think the average Russian soldier wants to be attacking Ukraine. I mean, this is a war against very much people of their own kin, in a sense, in a larger sense, in Eastern Europe. I mean, I don't think they want to be doing this any more than the Ukrainian people want to be attacked. I mean, so this is just these overlords, these fascist overlords, perpetrating their usual games, to drag our country into these massively high stakes standoffs that serve only their interests, and the only people who suffer are the ones at the grassroots level, the ones who are middle class, frankly, and in all these countries. I mean, God, these poor people being bombed out of their houses, and then Poland's got to take it in, and the ripple effect, with the energy prices and so forth, and Putin being. I know it's a shame that Putin really took the bait. I think there would have been probably better ways to handle this, but I mean, they backed him into a corner, and they just seem intent on creating turmoil in this world and creating war where it doesn't need to exist, where diplomacy would be better. I mean, Adam Schiff and these people and his ilk, and Kinzinger and these people, they're criminals. They are criminals. They are diabolical, evil people. I really hope that November brings change and that we can get sorted out with this, clear of the voter fraud, the massive multi-state voter fraud that they used to install Joe Biden and to cheat Trump out of his rightful place as president. And look, I mean, I'm sorry. I've seen enough come out already in Wisconsin. They had 100% voting, 100% in the nursing homes. It was 100% participation rate in voting. That is, I mean, it's asinine to think that's true. Yet David Plouffe, which is the sound of a turd hitting the toilet, water, frankly, if you ask me, from the Obama era, who was up there with Zuckerberg money, throwing it all around these particular targeted cities and precincts and so forth. And here in Colorado, you have Secretary of State is totally out of control, and I believe she's a Soros minion, Soros-funded, person who, it's amazing how they installed these systems, these murky voting systems, the mail-in balloting, and suddenly the state turns, quote, blue. This is not a blue state. Colorado is a red state with a couple blue cities and can quickly turn back. It's never been a convincing majority in that direction, and if they've riled enough patriots, I think, here. If we can get some reform, I mean, you have Tina Peters running against now. She was the Mesa County clerk who was targeted by the FBI, no less, as well as by the Secretary of State here, Jenna Griswold, who basically simply made an image of the Dominion-run voting machine systems to see what went on and what the manipulations that were possible. And, it's discovered that these things are not supposed to be in any way connected to any sort of internet link, nor even have the capacity to do so. Yet they found that on these systems they have 36 different access points, and this would cause the decertification. I mean, it would not qualify to be certified as a voting system under the federal guidelines or any other, frankly, state guidelines. And yet, they're demonizing this woman. They have made her life miserable, and she's a Gold Star mother. So, thank God for patriots like that. But look, this, up and down the line, I mean, we have a criminal cabal that has managed to, lie, cheat, and steal their way to power. And they're riding high now, and they're going to bring us in. They're probably going to bring us to the apocalypse if we don't act and to frankly blunt them.
Tyler, we have to go. The music's playing. Fantastic appearance as always, Tyler Nixon. By the way, don't forget to drop your fellow deadhead, Tucker Carlson. He's the deadhead. Tucker, a note about what Emmett's doing up here in South Dakota. Tyler Nixon, fantastic appearance. There's so much to dig into there, including what's going on. We got to talk about that later, about what's happening in Colorado. We got more coming up right after this on the best damn talk show in the world. I'm Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are back. It is time for the second hour on a Wednesday, halfway through the week here on the best damn talk show in the world, the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. This is The Backstory. Want to thank Tyler Nixon again for a fantastic appearance and a kind of a cosmically weird one because his name came out last night at dinner here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And then the next day he's booked on the show, and I didn't even talk to Rod about it, so figured that one out. Fantastic appearance by Tyler Nixon. Joining us later this hour, Addie Ads, the young reporter who is covering the Ghislaine Maxwell trial down in New York. We'll be talking to him in about a half hour and taking your calls, 202-521-1320. This is The Backstory. So I want to talk about something. I meant to get this. We've had so many great calls. Thanks again to Ingrid Tarif, David, Brave, everyone who called in the first hour. But I want people to understand part of what I think is going on. And this topic of the Nazis in Ukraine, Ukrainian Nazis, I reposted a great article I found about this, and it made a very good point that I want to underline. It said things that I've been saying for a while here, which is when you talk about Ukrainian Nazis, this is not to say there's, you know, it's like Hitler's Berlin in Kiev right now. It's not exactly. But clearly, and it's not just that Azov was in there. Understand why the Nazis are in there. This is important. So understand what was the situation in 2013. In 2013, you had a guy, Viktor Yanukovych, who was in there. And Yanukovych, despite what you've heard, was not a Putin puppet. Yanukovych was a guy whose cardinal sin was not being anti-Russian enough. He was not anti-EU. He was neutral. Yanukovych was much more neutral, but he wasn't opposed to Russia. He didn't hate them. So when he was offered 2 deals to help, because Ukraine had big financial problems, by the way, partially, I think, because of their reliance on the West and people like Soros since the fall of the Soviet Union. Don't forget, Soros got in there right as the Soviet Union was falling. And Ukraine was becoming, the Soviet Union was breaking up. And so Ukraine became, at that point, a full-on separate country. Because don't forget, Putin was exactly right. Prior to the Bolshevik communists in 1917, Ukraine, not Crimea, that too, but Ukraine itself was not a separate country. It was part of Russia. And it had a cultural heritage, but lots of parts of Russia have a cultural heritage. In fact, if you think about the name currently, the Russian Federation, it's because there's all these diverse regions. Some of them are more Asian, some of them are more Slavic, some of them are a mix. And Ukraine, however, was not a separate country. That was the Bolsheviks who did that, who made it a separate country. And once they started doing that, certain people in Ukraine who wanted a pure, racially pure Slavic, their view of Slavs, they didn't like Russians because they thought they were subhuman mutts. And they're very explicit about this. And these recent Nazis, Ukrainian Nazis, have used terms like subhuman to describe the people in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass. They mean that. They're not just throwing subhuman around as an insult. They mean literally not human. That's literally the way they view them. And you have to understand why they were brought in the Maidan, aside from the fact that they like to kill. As one of their people said recently from C14, this group there, based on the 14 words, look that up. It's a Nazi meme. But why did they bring in the Ukrainian Nazis? Yanukovych was neutral. In other words, he would deal with Russia and he would deal with Europe, and then he would take whatever he thought was the best deal, which is what he did. That's what the U.S. wanted to stop. They wanted a non-neutral, Russian-hating regime. This is really important to understand. They didn't want somebody just who liked the U.S. and liked Europe and liked NATO. They wanted someone who hated Russia. Hated. They wanted to salt the earth on the relations between Ukraine and Russia. And what better way to do that than to find people who viewed Russians ethnically as subhuman? In other words, what better way to bring in people with this Ukrainian Nazi philosophy of racial hatred? It's not a bug, it's a feature. It's not, well, we like the Nazis except for their racism. They like them because of their racism. That's why they brought them in, because they wanted a Ukraine that would never, ever, ever work with Russia. Ever. Because they hated them. It wasn't enough just to have a neutral country, which is, by the way, what I believe Vladimir Putin wants. If you look at recent statements, they're not referring to the Donbass as part of Russia. They want those Lugansk and Donetsk to be separate breakaway countries because they think it's safer, I think, for the people there, and they're right. Because the people in Kiev, the government put in by the United States, this can't be emphasized enough, hates Russians in a racist way. They hate them for their impure Slavic muddiness. And so that's why you end up with the sadistic murders of them. Because if someone's not human, just swat them like flies, crush them like vermin. Right? As soon as you can dehumanize them. And you have to understand, this is the Nazi philosophy that was put forth by Stefan Bandera. This is what his philosophy is. And when you hear people say Slava Ukraine, that is the Banderite call and response chant. As Mark Sloboda said the other day, it's the equivalent of if people were saying Deutschland über alles at the end. That's not pro-Germany. That's pro-Nazi Germany. Slava Ukraine is pro-Banderite. And we talked about how on the PBS show, there was the dude sitting there and he had, let me ask you this, Rod. First off, Rod, does what I say there make sense? That they wanted people who absolutely hated Russia on a deep level, more than just like they don't agree with their policies, but hated them ethnically. Does that make sense?
Oh, no, it makes total sense. And it's a little complicated, maybe a little bit for Americans here who don't interact much with people of Russian descent and understand how they're, how they're mixed. There's not just one Russia ethnic-looking person. You know what I'm saying? So it's a little bit difficult for people to understand. But I'll add to.
Do you know why? Because those Slavs all look alike to me, right? You know what I'm saying? In other words, I'm using the cliched phrase there, but it's kind of true. If you're not from that region, if you could see somebody Russian and somebody Yugoslavian, Ukrainian, or Yugoslavian, by the way, sure, Eastern Europeans all kind of look alike. You know what I'm saying, right, Ron?
Yeah, I actually, from 2007 to probably around 2012, I worked with many Ukrainians and Russians at different ambulance companies in Philadelphia. And first time I ever worked with a Ukrainian, I didn't know much about Ukraine. And the first thing I asked him, I was like, well, is that kind of like Russia? And, you can just imagine a Ukrainian guy in his mid-30s look over to me, and he gave me a smirk, and he says something like that. And that was my first lesson on Ukraine and Russia. So,
yeah, well, I tell a story. I used to work in Oxnard, California, at a Domino's Pizza there, and I was the only white boy working at this Domino's Pizza, and because Oxnard, California, is at the time it was like 60% Mexican, and now I think it's higher than that. But it was a very, very, very ethnically Mexican town. Does that make sense? That's where I first had real tacos. At a carne asada taqueria, I first had real tacos, and my life was slightly changed. But I was the only white guy who was a manager at this Domino's Pizza. All the other managers, guys like my boss there, Ignacio, but we called him Nacho, because he called himself Nacho. And a lot of times people would come in, and one time to order pizza, right? So this guy came in, and he ordered a pizza in Spanish, grande y salchicha y chile dulce, hongos, right? And he ordered the pizza, and he left. And my boss started cracking up, like laughing uproariously, Nacho was. And I said, what's so funny? He said, did you hear that guy's accent? And do you know what, Rod? I just heard two dudes speaking Spanish. I didn't hear any accent. Does that make sense? Like I'm a white guy. To me, it's two guys speaking Spanish. But he was saying that the other guy had an accent that he thought was hilarious. And I didn't hear it at all. So
you know what I'm saying? Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Just like if you go south down the map, Mexico has its different accents. Then you go to Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Uruguay. They all have different accents, and they all, well, not all, but a good majority of them, they kind of like make fun of each other, not in a bad way, but just make fun of each other's accent, the way they talk or how they say words.
Right. If somebody came on the show and they were speaking Russian and they had a goofy accent to Russians, right? You and I wouldn't notice it. We'd just go, we didn't understand it, right? Maybe if the person had a noticeably weird voice, but we wouldn't notice the difference. So for a lot of Americans who don't follow the Ukraine-Russia thing and haven't been following it and aren't Ukrainian or Russian, these differences are subtle. But the Ukrainians, they hate. It's not just like they're mad about policy. It's not like they're mad about Putin in particular. Putin knows this because he's Russian. They hate Russians, and that's why they're killing them. And that's what the U.S. wanted in there. Okay, go ahead, Rod.
But Lee, I want to add something to that. I had someone had, I think it was actually Max Blumenthal, had tweeted out the other part of the Victoria Nuland phone call, and it was about the boxer who's the mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, and she was talking. So pretty much, she also installed the mayor of Kiev, which is, or not just her, but the people she's works for. They installed Vitaly Klitschko again, who in Germany and pretty much all of Europe, he's looked at as a hero. But as you explained right now, people in Kiev or these Nazis you're talking about who hate Russians, he's protecting them in a way. So that this whole, it's kind of like a Hollywood sham where this is a hero boxer, but he's also protecting Nazis at the same time.
Right. Yeah. And again, what happened is, look, of course, when you have something like a war, right, and there's no doubt Russia went into Ukraine. I'm seeing that Russian media is not allowed to call it an invasion. Have you seen that, Rod? Have you seen the Western media? The Western media is saying that about.
Oh, the Western media is saying that. No, I haven't seen nobody say that.
The Western media is saying that Russian media, and by the way, we're Russian funded. You know, let me make one distinction that I do see a misrepresentation. They refer to us as Russian controlled media. We are Russian funded, but we're Russian controlled, I guess only in the sense that if Putin was really mad at me personally, I guess maybe they could get the word down and I could lose my job or something. But I don't think so. Rod, you know this. When you and I prepare the show, how much Russian influence is there on our decisions about what guests to book, what topics to cover, anything like that?
Negative 20.
No, literally, we don't get any. When this war started, so I'm hearing that Russians aren't allowed to say that it's an invasion. Well, here's what it was. It's a military action that clearly is obviously when there's troops going in, I'll call that an invasion. But this was started and ginned up by the U.S. No one told me to say that. I can just read. I can just watch videos and see what happened here. And we talked about this before. And you know, one of the most shocking things that we heard this week on the show, and I talked to him about it a little bit afterwards, a little bit. I wasn't fishing for details. But Mondays on the show, we have Carmine Sabia joining us, as Carmine Monday is our co-host. And you heard him say that he wrote a piece and he got word from one of the publications he writes for to back off. Don't do that again. You heard that, right, Ron?
Yeah, no, I heard that.
And I wasn't, and this exactly proves the point that I've been making. I don't know who said it to him, but you know what? No one's backed us off a damn thing here. No one has said here, hey, don't ask people just what they think. And I personally end up being, I think I'm probably the most pro-Russian, pro-Putin host on Radio Sputnik. I'm not somebody who goes, well, I don't agree with everything, because I don't see any point in saying I'm pro-Putin does not mean that I have to agree with every specific thing. Furthermore, second, I don't know what I'm supposed to really disagree with. When I look into things, I think that they're not true. So when people go, well, what about him targeting civilians? I haven't seen that. I've seen the opposite. And I never hear from people going, what about, you know, I never hear people say this, Rod. They never say, look, I'm pro-Ukraine, but I'm critical of some things Zelensky does. I don't think Zelensky should have given people Molotov cocktails and should have released prisoners and given out AK-47s. Can you make the same criticisms of Putin? The answer is A, yes, I can. B, he hasn't done any of those things. So I don't know what I'm supposed to be critical of. Because whenever I look into things, I think Putin has handled this war. It's a war. So that means, unfortunately, there are innocent people who are going to die. Period. I understand that. And I'm not in favor of that. But I have not seen the Russians target civilians. I've seen them go out of their way to avoid. I'll put it like this. If this is the U.S., Rod, do you know what we would have done is shock and awe. We just would have gone in guns blazing, blown up everything, and then let God sort out the pieces. You know what I'm getting at?
I think that's the whole, I guess you could call it an issue. I mean, it is an issue because people are kind of, they're not seeing what they're used to seeing from America, where we just go in and we just flatten whole. I mean, just look at Libya. I mean, it was a prosperous country for its own people. And I mean, look at it now. It's open slave trade for, I think, well, I don't know with inflation now, but I think it was $50 for like a grown man, like his 20s. So, I mean, they're just used to seeing things like that happen. And Russia, they're trying to do this very tactically, very precise, and I think they're just used to seeing, just like you said, total shock and awe.
And I think that that's worse. And I don't hear people say what I said. Say, well, you know, I'm pro Zelensky, but I'm critical of this. It's Zelensky's a hero. He's the new George Washington. And then they just repeat any lie they've ever heard. I have to deal with people who are saying stuff to me like, but Putin's the richest guy on the planet. You got that lie from Bill Browder. Have you heard that one, Rod? You've heard that, right?
Yeah, there was a whole special on, I believe it was MSNBC, and it didn't make sense. I actually saw like 10 minutes of it. It was just all conjecture. They didn't show you any proof. It just, he has all these homes over here, maybe.
Well, my friend Colleen called me. She was listening to Fox Radio, and they were doing like an hour special on Putin, and it was the same thing. But let me explain that. Anybody who's confused about this, Fox News is anti-Russian. The way I know that is News Corp was one of the lobbyists who paid for the Magnitsky Act, which is Bill Browder's signature. People sometimes go, well, why is Bill Browder on Fox all the time? Because Fox literally was a lobbyist. Go to opensecrets.org. Look up the Magnitsky Act. You'll see one of the lobbyist sponsors was News Corp. And let me mention, I was going to mention this when Tyler was on, in that cosmically odd appearance, because it really was weird. I was just at dinner last night, and suddenly he's like, you know Tyler Nixon? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, yes, I do. And I was going to call you last night and say to you, Rod, the weirdest thing just happened. I was at dinner. I was going to tell you that, but I didn't. But it's one of those things. Do you ever have like where you think you're going to call somebody and you're planning on it, and then if you haven't had this happen to you yet, don't worry, you're going to get old too, Rod. I sometimes, I think I'm going to call Rod and tell him about that. And then I got tired and I didn't do it. But then when I saw that Tyler was on, I'm like, wait, did I call Rod? Have you ever had that happen where you think about calling somebody, you don't do it, but then you try to remember whether you did call him or not? Have you hit that age yet, Rod?
I think it's just what happens. It's what's happening to us with this technology. Because sometimes I'll get a text and I won't respond because I'm like, oh, I'll call this person back, and the day will go on and be like, wait, did I call that person? You know what I mean? So yeah, it happens. No, and that reminds me. By the way, I should pimp this. Tomorrow I'll be on with Alex Jones at noon Central on InfoWars with Alex Jones talking about Ukraine and Russia with Alex. That's going to be fun. It's always fun to talk to Alex. A producer over there told me Alex has been asking about me. That's nice. In a good, not in a bad way. Hey, let's get Leon, that kind of thing. So that'll be fun tomorrow with Alex Jones. Look for me there. And by the way, I've noticed, do you know what I've noticed on Twitter? Is a lot of people seem to be watching Revealing Ukraine and Ukraine on Fire. I'm in Revealing Ukraine, of course. Have you noticed that the film, I think people are thirsty for information. And they're starting to look on places like YouTube or Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever, looking around, are there any good films on this? And people are finding the Oliver Stone-produced film. Have you noticed people talking about Revealing Ukraine more lately, Rod? Have you seen that?
Yeah, no. Actually, two things. One with what you're talking about. I saw a clip. I think it might have been even. I forgot who it was. I'm sorry, I can't remember. But there's another one, that's a propaganda one called Winter on Fire. I think it's on Netflix. It's about Ukraine. And I think people are, instead of watching that one, are watching Ukraine on Fire, and they're seeing that one's propaganda. The one Winter on Fire, I believe it's called. So yeah, I have been seeing that. And just the second thing, because you brought up you're going to be on Alex Jones tomorrow. Did you see that Enrique got arrested in the middle of the night last night?
Yes, I did see that. And I said, I hashtagged out Enrique Tarrio did nothing wrong. Enrique Tarrio, we've had as a guest on the show, and has been arrested on conspiracy charges for January 6th. Do you know what's about to go down in flames? When the Democrats lose the House and the Senate, that whole January 6th committee, do you know who needs to be investigated? Alexandra Chalupa. Alexandra Chalupa, Este El Gordo. People can figure out what I'm saying there. They speak Spanish. But Alexandra Chalupa needs to be investigated. Because what happened was the U.S. overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014, then used that government through Poroshenko to interfere in the 2016 election to try to keep Donald Trump from being elected and try to put Hillary Clinton into place. Because I think they would have, I think if Hillary Clinton, what do you think about this? I'll get to Mark in Indiana in a second. But Rod, do you think if Hillary Clinton had been elected in 2016, that what we're seeing, the aggressive push against Russia, that would have happened during the Clinton administration? What do you think, Rod?
Oh my God! Probably within the first 100 days.
Yes, because they would have been saying we have to fight back against Russia trying to interfere in our election.
They would have just dumped it all on Trump. They would have did what Victoria Nuland was pretty much saying on that clip, that this is what Russia does. They just lie. They would have dumped it on Trump, and they would use that to start a war.
And believe me, they'd like to go after, you're still talking about Enrique arrested in the middle of the night. And we all know what they did to Tyler Nixon's friend and my friend Roger Stone, the way they went after him. Can you imagine what they'd do if they had arrested Trump, frog march, gun to his head? They would have done what the Black Panthers did in the Marin County Massacre, which is they took a judge. You've probably seen this photo, famous photo. When the Black Panthers took over the Marin County Courthouse, Jonathan Jackson, George Jackson's brother, was part of this. And so was Angela Davis. She was the one who supplied the weapons. But when they took that over, did you ever see the photo of where they took the shotgun, the sawed-off shotgun, sawed off in Angela's apartment, and they duct taped it to a judge's throat? Did you see that ever, Rod?
Oh yeah, I saw that, and there's actually a animated series that kind of used that and on Netflix. So yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, and it's horrible because, by the way, the judge ended up dying in the way you would imagine if you had. That's the way I'm saying. If the Clinton administration, in a fantasy alternative history, I'm sure it's gone through Clinton's head, they would have taken Trump out with a shotgun duct taped to his neck. You know what I'm saying? That's the way they would have liked to have taken him out. They would have gone a step further than the Roger Stone raid. But 202-521-1320. We got ads coming up after the break. But first, let's talk to Mark in Indiana. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Hey, Lee. I heard Tyler Nixon say that he thought maybe there were better ways that Russia could have handled the diplomatic stalemate between the U.S. and Russia regarding Ukraine. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on what those ways could have been.
No, I think Tyler, obviously I like Tyler a lot. I think what Tyler's doing, it's not fair to talk about him when he's not here, but I will anyway. I think he was doing what I've seen a fair number of people do, which is they don't want to just say, I think Putin's done stuff right here. So they want to hedge their bets a little bit and say, I don't agree with everything Putin's done. But they don't have any specifics on that. And when he says something like, I think it could have been handled differently, he's making it as a generic statement to kind of try to seem reasonable. Does that make sense, Mark?
Yeah, it does. But I don't know if you wanted to elucidate on it, and because maybe there were other things Russia could have done, and I just wondered if you had any thoughts on it.
No, my guess is if I sat down, and here's the problem. I like Tyler, and I understand human nature. And we're live on the air on a radio show, and it's all being recorded and everything. And if I were having a drink, I don't drink. If I was having an iced tea, let's say, I would smoke weed. But if I were having a smoke with Tyler, let's say, I prefer edibles, but okay. And just he and I were talking, I would say, okay, dude, but honestly, What do you think they could have done differently? And Tyler, I think, might have gone, I don't know. Now that you mention it, I don't really know. But I don't like to put people in that position live on the air. Even people I don't like. I don't like to try to play a gotcha game. Does that make sense, Mark?
Yeah, I wasn't trying to get you to nail.
No, I didn't think you were either. I'm just saying that when I talk to people off the air and they're like, yeah, I wish you'd done something different, I would say to them, okay, like what? And then, because then there's no pressure. There's no microphones, aside from whatever the NSA and CIA are doing to us. Right, but then there's no microphones. And people can be a little more honest. But great question, Mark. Thanks for the question. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk to Addy Ads. And I want to ask Addy about the war, too, the same thing I've been doing with everybody. Just ask them what their thoughts are on the Ukraine-Russian war. Because this is a damn free speech zone. Sometimes someone might argue a little too free. When you're talking about 50-foot crack whores, maybe that's too much free speech. But we got more coming up right after this on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want to record.
Let's talk about that. Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390. This is Radio Sputnik. Damn it. So there, on the radio in the Washington, D.C. area, you're driving around, walking around with your boombox, whatnot. Joining us now, journalist Addy Ads. Hey, Addy, how you doing?
Hey, Lee. Thanks for having me on the show again.
Yo, it's great to have you on again, Addy. Let me do this before we get to. We want to talk about juror number 50 in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and also you've been covering the Freedom Convoy a little bit, right, in D.C.
Yes, sir.
You didn't freeze yourself.
Yeah, no, it was. It wasn't too. You know what? It was all right. Yeah, I was down there 2 days, and then I came back up for the trial, and I'm still in the New York area.
Okay, so we'll talk to you about that in 1 second. But first, because we are a free speech zone, Addy, I'm going to leave you the floor. Just any thoughts you have about the Ukraine-Russian war that's going on now. Any thoughts at all in any direction? What say you? Any thoughts on it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I'd appreciate, the platform, the free speech platform, Lee. It's something that's not my area of expertise. I usually defer to people like yourself who have been studying it for longer. But there's definitely a misconception in the West, largely due, I think, to the corporate legacy mainstream media and how they have presented Russia and Ukraine, not just recently, but I think going back years, which is why I thought it was quite interesting that the UFC fighter named Bryce Mitchell, he actually mentioned Biden's money that was made in the Ukraine with regards to Burisma Energy and his son Hunter Biden. And also, I think a name people should be aware of is Igor Kolomoisky, who's kind of a Ukrainian oligarch, warlord, weapons dealer, arms trafficker, who has been working in and out of Ukraine and the United States, particularly in the state of Ohio, for years now. And I think it was actually last year, if not late 2020, that the feds raided Kolomoisky's property. I want to say it was in Ohio. I could be wrong, but they raided one of his American properties. But as far as the West's understanding, it's been quite...
No, wait, 1 second. Addie, let me just stop you for 1 second because we happen to have a clip to talk about that Bryce Mitchell thing. So I just want to get the clip in while it's still fresh in people's mind. Then I have a question about the Kolomoisky Ohio thing, because when you mention Ohio, of course, one of the first things I think of is Les Wexner, who, of course, is from the Epstein. He was Jeff Epstein's big funder and a major player in Ohio, a major funder also of John Kasich. We'll talk about that in 1 second. But first, let's play this clip, Command Central, about Bryce Mitchell, this UFC fighter. Play that.
So of all the people we've seen weigh in on Ukraine, maybe none has put the American position more succinctly or expressed it more wisely than a man called Bryce Mitchell. We played a portion of his comments on this show yesterday. Bryce Mitchell is a cattle farmer from Arkansas. He's also a fairly well-known UFC fighter. Last week, he was asked, what do you think about Ukraine? And here's part of what he said.
I'm not going nowhere to fight none of these wars for these politicians. I'm staying at home, and when the war comes to Arkansas, I will dig my boots in the ground, and I will die for everything I love, and I will not retreat. If this country's invaded and everybody's saying, well, we gotta evacuate, we gotta leave, I will not. I will dig my boots in the Arkansas soil, and I will fight for the people that I love, for the land that I love, and the way of life that I love. But I'm not going overseas to fight. I don't know what's going on.
A lot of people you see on TV would leave instantly if we were invaded. There's been polling on it. It shows it pretty clearly. You should pay attention to the people who wouldn't leave, who'd fight for their country and for their people, the ones they love.
Yeah, so Addie, that's part of what you're talking about, right? That's Bryce Mitchell?
Yes, yeah, that was the quote. Yep.
Yeah, and what was your take on that?
Yeah, I was surprised to see a UFC fighter, give that sort of take, which I think is fair, given the fact he's not a journalist. He doesn't have as much time as we do to learn about these things. I thought it was a decent take, but I also think people can't wait until the fight gets to their doorstep. You gotta look at the intelligence beforehand and know what's going on, or you're just going to be kind of run around with your head cut off, almost like a chicken with its head cut off. So I think people do need to tune at least in partially to have a decent idea of what's going on. And that's definitely not that the Russians are bad guys or that Putin is not acting in a rational way, which he's being made to look as a despot or a dictator. But the United States works with the dictators like Mohammed bin Salman or Mohammed Bone Salman, as I saw somebody call him the other day, that are far worse than somebody like Putin. And when you have the Azov Brigade being funded by the West, the Pravi sector, it's a war it didn't start in the last few weeks. It's been going on, since then. And it's something I've been talking about too with a friend who's like, why don't they just go to a different part of the country with the refugee thing? And it's like, these people have seen 2 coups in the last 20 years, and then this war now, and it's something that a country like Mexico is seeing too, with people giving up on their own countries to go and just try to live in peace.
So you mentioned Kolomoisky, and it's got apparently connections to Ohio, and because you covered the Ghislaine Maxwell trial and the Jeff Epstein story, of course, Les Wexner, who was Jeff Epstein's funder, part of the mega group of Israeli donors, and Les Wexner, based out of Ohio. What is with Ohio, Addie? Have you figured that out yet? Is there something going on with Ohio?
That's a great question, Lee, and I don't know if it's a connection you've made before this, and if you have, I wouldn't be surprised because you have a great understanding of what's going on with these criminals. But yeah, it's something I noticed in the last, maybe it was late 2020 or so. I was like, there's just something about this state. It's a swing state politically voting. It's a drug trafficking hub. It's a human trafficking hub. Cleveland, as you mentioned, is a big part of that, and Les Wexner and Kolomoisky, and I wouldn't be surprised if those guys don't know each other. But yeah, there's something about Ohio. I think part of it, Lee, is when you look at the drug cartels' trafficking routes, they really have, the West Coast right above them. But as far as the rest of the country, the Midwest is kind of a good centralizing point to get to the east and then to get down south as well. So I think that has part to do with it. But I think there's something deeper there.
Well, here's two things I know. So I covered a story called the Steubenville rape case a few years ago. And in Steubenville, Ohio, which is down near the Kentucky border, West Virginia border, in that area, it's right across the river from West Virginia. They were talking about how in Steubenville, a lot of drug dealers had moved down from Chicago into Steubenville. So when you talk about the centralizing point, that's one thing the cops told me down there. And it was clearly part of what was happening. Steubenville used to be a big steel town. Then the bottom dropped out of the steel market due to the imports of Chinese steel. And it really killed the economy in Steubenville. And they were seeing drug dealers come down from Chicago and really make a mess out of Steubenville. But the other thing that I know about, do you know about Les Wexner's connection to John Kasich, the governor of Ohio? Do you know about that, Addie?
I actually don't. I don't know too much about that.
Okay, so this is a big deal, and it's very easy to look into. John Kasich, people may or may not remember, in 2016, the last candidate to drop out, he stayed in as long as possible, aside from Trump, was John Kasich. He stayed in even though he hadn't won anything, and there was no enthusiasm. So he was kind of a spoiler. Does that make sense? Kasich was a spoiler in 2016 who was trying to spoil it for Trump. Well, if you go look at his funding, he was funded by two people, Les Wexner and significantly Les Wexner's wife. Wexner's wife provided, there was a pack called like Sunshine or something like that. Had something to do with sunlight. The Sunshine Pack. She funded that. And almost all the money went to Kasich. And again, that opensecrets.org website, if you look up where Kasich's funding came from in 2016, it was Les Wexner and his wife. So that's the story there, Addie. And it's on paper. There's no question about it. Anyone can go look it up and go, yeah. And then it's sort of interesting that it was a anti-Trump person. You follow me? That it was Kasich staying in. So that's what I know about that. Now, let's talk about this. Explain to people who Juror 50 is. What's going on with that trial? And that, I assume that's not their real name.
No. I've released his real name, but I'm not trying to shout it from the mountaintops. But his pseudonym is Scotty David, although Scott is his real first name. Juror number 50 in the docket. And despite that, his name is still being redacted. He's the juror who came out and talked to this Australian journalist named Lucia Osborne Crowley, who I actually got to know a bit over the course of the trial. And what I can tell happened as far as behind the scenes is Vicky Ward kind of took this younger journalist, I want to say she's 30 or early 30s, late 20s, something like that, under her wing, and I think facilitated the contact between David and Lucia Crowley. And Scotty David, Juror 50, he actually mentioned Lucia's name, just her first name, in court today. So that was or rather yesterday. I'm sorry. So that was interesting. And so the Independent released that. Juror 50, Scotty David, disclosing he had been sexually abused as a child. And that, of course, with him saying he hadn't been abused as a child on the questionnaire, which is a series of questions they give every jury specific to the trial, just to make sure that they are as neutral and unbiased as possible. He actually wrote no on that. So he actually lied technically on that, although his claim in court was that he was distracted because he had just broken up with his ex, he said, I believe it's ex-boyfriend, if I'm not mistaken. There was a lot of commotion on the day of. He started losing concentration towards the end of the questionnaire session, and he tried to be apologetic, or at least appear apologetic. He said at one point, I apologize for wasting people's time and money. And so because of that, the defense filed for a mistrial, and a hearing was granted. David was subpoenaed. They have a hearing, I believe it's an administrative date next week. But other than that, no official entries on the docket that we can see, because several entries finally were submitted today. I thought there might be able to get them in last night, but I think 4 of them were all submitted under seal and or into the vault, so we couldn't even see what was going on there. But most people that I've talked to, they don't see a mistrial happening. The government just doesn't really change their mind very often, and they have I would say a decent verdict here with 5 out of 6 on what I say was a shaky trial as far as the prosecution went.
Yeah, the prosecutor didn't seem to have done their job as well as they could have. Is that fair? Is that your estimation, Addy?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I think so. The court, the government in general, it almost seemed like they wanted to make it difficult on the lawyers to win this with the evidence and the witnesses admitted into court. There's stronger evidence out there and stronger witnesses out there. Not that these women weren't victimized, but and just in terms of legal power and legal firepower, it just wasn't there. But nonetheless, the court of public opinion, I think, played a huge role in this, and so it's hard to find anybody who hasn't heard of these people, the Maxwells and Epstein. So in that sense, I think people really wanted to see justice being served here for this Mossad princess, as I called her in my book, which is how to cover the Ghislaine Maxwell trial.
Right. By the way, last time you were on the show, the book was just coming out. How's the book doing for you? What's the reaction been?
Yeah, it's doing okay. It's doing good. I'm trying to plug it as much as I can. Got the paperback out. I was actually just in D.C., as I mentioned, covering the People's Convoy in Hagerstown, Maryland. But I also went to this conference. It was called Transcending the Israeli Lobby at Home and Abroad. John Kiriakou, your former co-host, was there. He spoke. He had a great speech. Roger Waters was there from Pink Floyd, so I got to ask him his take on Israel. And he is, one of the only musicians who speaks out against Israeli state corruption, state crimes, along with Lorde. I found out Lorde. I think she's Australian or New Zealand a musician as well. So. I was down in D.C. covering that. So, just trying to plug my book down there as well. And it's, related because of the Israeli connection. So I also met up there principally to meet up with Ryan Dawson of ANC Report. He was doing a screening for his new documentary that's coming out.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And so people, aside from sales, people like the book. What's the reaction been? People who've read it, they enjoy it. What are they saying? Plug the book.
Yeah, I think so. Kriston T. Harris of the Rundown Live, who I actually write for out of independent media out of Wisconsin. I gave him a copy, but he still wanted to pay me for it because he's just a solid guy. He told me he was reading it on the plane or when he was flying back, I think, and he really liked it. So I go into the intelligence connections a bit with the Maxwell family stuff, which is not been covered very much at all. My day-to-day experience of the trial and what that was like. It was like 30 days. So it was kind of like it's a bit more episodic than my first book, which is more more research-based. It's just denser in a bigger book, which is Public Intelligence. That's more so about historical background of intelligence agencies and the new media that Lee is a part of, as well as myself. That's kind of going against the grain of the corporate media a bit. So yeah, I think I've been getting good reactions from it, and it went more smoothly than the first one. The first one was a lot more difficult for sure.
Well, that's great. That's great. So people can find. Say the name of the book is, people can find it and buy it.
Yeah. So if you just type in Addy Ads on Amazon, it'll pop up, ADDY or you could just type in the title. It's How to Cover the Ghislaine Maxwell Trial, and it's about a novella length, so it's not that long, about 100 pages or so. So yeah, and it's a good way to learn about the Mossad and CIA connections a bit, and what the experience of the trial was, and kind of behind the scenes too. If people are interested in what journalism and the journalists and the interactions between them behind the scenes, I think some people find that interesting too. So that's in there as well.
And by the way, a quick note to our producer Rod: let's redouble our efforts to get Roger Waters on the show, because I would kind of freak out. I would really like to talk to Roger Waters, and I'll talk to him about politics, and I won't salivate about how well Wish You Were Here's hold up. But let's get him on anyway, if we can, Rod, especially since he was just on with Kiriakou. Throw in, Rod, here's a suggestion. Say we know Addy Ads. We're going to drop his name with Roger. Can we do that, Addy? Is that okay?
Oh, of course. Yeah, he actually accepted my book. I gifted it to him, so that was amazing. So yeah, of course, Lee.
Thanks, because we really would like. He was in the Sputnik studio a few years ago, and I happened to come in like late that day, or I left early or something, and I missed meeting Roger Waters because I'm a huge Floyd fan, among other things. But also, he's been so great on issues like the Assange issue, doing, concerts, him and the acoustic guitar outside for Assange, that I admire his political stance. And taking on the Israeli lobby, So let me ask you this, Addy. Have you looked into the Cernovich claims much? Is that anything you've explored at all?
Yeah, he is somebody who, speaking of Dawson, he's actually on his Epstein map because of a few articles he wrote, and then I think one of them was defending Dershowitz, if I'm not mistaken. But
yes,
a bit just peripherally with that network. I'm not sure what to think about that guy, to be honest. I don't know too much about him.
Well, let me tell you what to think of him, and it's all factual. This is a guy who I have him on video saying, if you're connecting him with the Mossad, that's anti-Semitic. So he's saying connecting Epstein, and he's somebody who came out of nowhere. He was promoted by Bannon out of Gamergate, and he's a liar. And he filed a lawsuit against Virginia Giuffre to try to release material on behalf of Alan Dershowitz. That's not what I think. That's what Virginia Giuffre thought. Have you seen the filings in that?
Wow, I haven't. That would make sense why he's on Dawson's map, because it's again, this network is so big. I'm still learning. I was talking to this Professor Tom Volshow from, I believe he's Staten Island College. He's a sociology, criminology professor and an investigative journalist on the side. After the hearing, we were chatting, and he was teaching me things. I was learning from him, and so this network is so deep. It's hard. It's I think impossible for any one person to grasp it all. So I think it's really a team effort making all these connections.
Well, where it comes down, Cernovich was working with this guy Chuck Johnson. Chuck has known Alan Dershowitz since Chuck was 16. Chuck used to audit classes of Dershowitz's at Harvard. And when Matt Gaetz brought Chuck Johnson to the State of the Union address, Alan Dershowitz came out and defended him. So this is all established. And this is one of those things, all you'd have to do is read Giuffre's filing against Cernovich. It's a very clear filing. Very, very clear. But Mike Cernovich goes out and he claims that the reason Epstein was arrested was him, Mike Cernovich. He says he's claimed publicly that he sued Epstein. He did no such thing. But he wanted to take credit for that because then it gives him credibility with people. They go, okay, he's the guy who broke the Epstein case. No, no, no. And there's photos of him. He said Alan Dershowitz was his inspiration for going to law school. That's on the record. And so is these photos of Dershowitz and Cernovich, and this filing by Virginia Giuffre. And the filing speaks for itself. Anybody who thinks for a second that Mike Cernovich sued Epstein just has to read this legal filing by Virginia Giuffre. And I'll tell you who else is connected to that network. This one attorney, Robert Barnes. You've heard of Barnes, right?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Barnes tried to shut me down. I went on Alex Jones's show, and I just showed the paperwork with Cernovich. And Barnes, who a lot of people like and trust over on the right, because here's the thing. Barnes is capable of talking a good game in public. At the end of the day, though, he was backing Cernovich and that whole network of people. So explain this map that Ryan's got, because that's interesting to me. I've tried to map some of this stuff out for people, but what's this map that Ryan has?
Yeah. If people want to buy it, it's at ancreport.com, and he maps out a large portion, and I would say the bulk of the core of the Epstein-Maxwell network, showing financial connections or otherwise. And yeah, Cernovich is on the map. So I'm definitely going to look into him more and see what's going on there. And if that Chuck Johnson's the same one that I'm thinking of, somebody who I can't say who was telling me about him within the past year they did it, and how he was being handled by an intelligence entity at one point in time. So if that's the same person I'm thinking of, and I can't reveal my source there, but that's interesting. This group is these connections. It's inevitable. We're going to find them eventually if we just keep plugging.
Well, let me save you some time on this. If you go to my website, populist.tv, the second story down is about Dershowitz and Cernovich. And if you click on that story, I urge people, and I would urge you, Eddie, click the links, because I linked to everything. If I say, in a filing, Virginia Giuffre said, blah, 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 you'll see that's a link. If you click the link, you'll see it goes right to the filing, which is, you know what it's like when you read a news story. It's very irritating when they don't do that. I want to see the filing. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so
that's what journalism is. That's what you got to cite. You got to source. Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to check the article out right after the show.
And I'm telling you, even if that article was just a list of the links, don't take my word. Forget the article. Click on the links. Does that make sense? Like that's what you want. It's got all the material you want. The filings, everything is sourced in that article. So it's a very good art. When I say it's very good, I'm not tooting my own horn. It's not that I wrote fantastic prose or anything. I'm saying it's a good article for a researcher and a journalist like yourself. But hey, Addie, we're almost completely out of time, and we didn't get to the other thing we wanted to talk to you about, which is the Freedom Convoy. Do you have 30 seconds of the Freedom Convoy? Were you able to pick up a Confederate flag or anything?
I didn't see any Confederate flags. It was pretty Trump heavy. I missed Ann Vandersteel by a few minutes, but I did meet up with Christanti Harris. I met up with Ford Fisher, and I met up with Reed Coverdale, and I actually went there together. So it was good. And last I heard, it seemed to be picking up steam with truckers showing up in half a dozen or dozen at a time. But they're kind of using Hagerstown Speedway as a fallback position for fear of going downtown D.C., which makes sense after the 6th.
And especially after what happened to Enrique Tarrio being arrested. We got more coming up tomorrow on the best damn talk show in the world. Thanks to Addie Ads. Thanks to Tyler Nixon. Thanks to all of the callers. We'll see you tomorrow. I'm Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory.